The new Pirelli F1 tyres are weird this season, really weird. Often the hard tyre has been the fastest. 2 and 3 stops have been faster than 1 stop that Pirelli recommends, and Mercedes and Aston Martin have been using all of their tyres before the race. But yet, with all that madness, the racing has been excellent, and that is partly down to the tyres being great for pushing hard. So what exactly is going on here? Well, we're going to go over everything that we know about these new F1 tyres for 2022. Now, if you're looking to work in Formula 1 or motorsports in the future, you're going to need to understand Formula 1 from the bottom up. And classical mechanics are a great place to start. And the best place to learn about this is with today's sponsor, Brilliant. They are the best place to learn about science, technology, engineering, and maths, with interactive courses that enable you to learn by doing. Now, my recommendation would be to take the course on classical mechanics, as it uses Formula 1 as a case study, building your knowledge of friction, aerodynamics and torque. And just look at this, it's even basing sections on the Lowe's hairpin in Monaco. This course is going to be right up your street if you're an F1 fan. But what's best is that you can learn at your own pace, with courses that are specifically designed to build from the fundamentals up. To get started for free, visit brilliant.org/drive61 or click on the link in the description. And the first 200 of you to sign up will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. Now, why are we talking about this? Well, the racing this year, but particularly the last few races, has been incredible. And that's not just down to the new aerodynamic regulations.
Now, part of this is definitely the aerodynamics, and there's no doubt about that the cars are able to follow each other much more closely without losing as much performance. But I think for me and for many people, the unsung hero in this is, and it may sound surprising for some people who've been very critical, is the Pirelli tyres that really have allowed this racing, both from a point of view of the ability to play with those tyres, between the the raceability of the mediums and the hards, and how you can stretch them out, how hard you can push them through a stint as well, but equally how well they're working straight out of the pits.
So as we know, the 13-inch tyres of last year were fragile. It really mattered how you brought them up to temperature. They were sensitive to sliding and they lost grip pretty quickly. But this year, Pirelli have made a huge effort towards making them more resilient to racing, allowing the drivers to push them harder without costing them too much tyre life, which on the whole has worked. But these tyres are far from straightforward. So let me explain. Last year, it seemed that the teams were generally favouring the softer compounds, which meant running the soft tyre at the start of the race and then usually putting on the medium. The only real exceptions were if there was a higher degradation that weekend, in which case they would normally use the hards. But the penalty for longer life was a much slower tyre, often more than 1.5 seconds off the pace from the soft. But this year, it's different. In Austria, we actually saw the hard tyres have more peak performance than the mediums on some of the cars, which is kind of weird. And that explains why the strategies have been different this year, with the teams favouring the harder compound of tyres. So starting on the mediums for a good launch off the line, and then moving on to the hards. And if it's a two-stopper, which it often has been this year, the teams are electing for a medium followed by a hard and another hard. But that does make some sense when you look at the changes Pirelli have made. The first being the tyre blankets. They have lowered the temperature of the tyre blankets this year. Now, because of the regulations, the temperatures of the tyre blankets has been dropped from 100 degrees to 70. So Pirelli have designed the compounds to warm up faster, meaning the drivers aren't tiptoeing around too much for the first few laps of a stint. But that in turn has led to the team selecting slightly different compounds of tyre. So where in 2021 they would select the softer compounds for a better warm-up, they can now select the harder tyres, which are more resilient, and then go further into the Grand Prix, which for us as fans has been really good, because we have seen some epic battles, often with multiple cars, and this can only happen with the right tyres. If you look at the aero regs from this year and paired it with the tyres from last year, I'm quite certain we wouldn't see these sorts of multi-lap, multi-car battles. And that's because Pirelli have nailed the compound this year, in that the tyres can deal with a little bit more sliding. Previously, this would have heated the tyres so much that it would start to overheat, leaving the driver with no grip and killing the battle. Essentially meaning the car following would have to back off to avoid killing their tyres. And if they didn't, ruining their strategy. But this year, the following car has less going against them, less aero wash and less fade in the tyres. And that means that groups of cars, like the Perez-Leclerc-Hamilton battle at Silverstone, can stay close for several laps. And I'm sure we're all glad that they can do that this season.
And it's just providing fantastic racing and lots more opportunity to actually see the cars, fighting for track position rather than it being purely done on pit stops. So I think that's something that really has been brought, to be quite different to Formula One this year.
So the tyres have enabled great racing, but they do seem to have some weird quirks. First is that the harder tyre seems to be more popular in the race, with the softs only really being used for qualifying, and also if there's a late safety car. So what's that about?
Typically, the hard ends up being a much all-round better race tyre than the mediums, which tend to suffer ever so slightly more with degradation, certainly have much shorter lives, but don't really have that lap time advantage over the hards to really kind of warrant it. And it then makes you start to think about what Pirelli have done to the tyres this year. Now we have to remember this year that they are very different tyres, not just because they're now running on 18-inch rims, but also because the tyre warmer temperature has been turned down to try and get these tyres to warm up much better from a lower starting temperature. And as a result, I think they've almost overcompensated on some of the harder compounds by allowing them to come in much quicker and be much more durable when they're actually running compared with the next compound down, which would be between the hard and the medium.
So the better warm-up is meaning that there is less of a performance penalty with the harder tyre. So much so that I would say if they turned off the rule about running 2 different compounds during the race, the teams would prefer to have 2 sets of hards for that race. But you have to say it's created much, much better racing. So yeah, it's weird, but I'm all for it. Now, after mentioning the better warm-up on these tyres, you may be thinking about Mercedes, because they have been really struggling with warm-up despite the new tyres. At the end of the Silverstone Grand Prix, it left Lewis Hamilton a little bit vulnerable for about 5 laps. And then also at the start of the race, Mercedes seemed to struggle with its tyres. So what's going on here?
There's a couple of outliers here. One of them is Mercedes. And they really struggle to get temperature into their tyres, really affects their qualifying, really affects their opening laps of a stint or after safety car restarts. But as you get later in the stint, their tyres really come on. And we've seen so often at the end of the race, at the end of a stint, the Mercedes are making leaps and bounds over their competitors who have, kind of got the life out of the tyre earlier in the stint and are now kind of managing the tyre towards the end of its life.
And essentially what they're doing is running a setup that is very biased to the race. And by that I mean that they are putting less energy into the tyres than the other cars. So where the other cars can fire up the tyres quickly, the Mercedes can save them better for longer. And so by the looks of it, it seems that Mercedes have gone a little bit too far with this philosophy. But there is one final quirk that seems to be helping teams out, and this is the scrubbing of tyres.
The other variation on this is Aston Martin. Now, when you look at the tyre sets available before the race provided by Pirelli, you'll actually see that Aston Martin appear to never have any new sets of tyres. And you think, well, how can they have used up all of their tyres and are racing on used tyres? Well, it's not quite the case. What they do is they often will go out and scrub a set of tyres. Now, what this means is they're not going out and putting a hard lap on the tyres. They're really just running the car around a lap, get that shine off the tyre. This appears to be giving them quite big dividends in terms of race performance. But when you come to the race with these scrubbed tyres, with their setup, and we know that Aston Martin, previously Racing Point, Force India, etc., have always liked these very long drawn-out race strategies, really getting the most out of long life tyres, have brought this back to this car, but with scrubbed tyres.
Now, this isn't unusual in racing. Often just putting that heat cycle in the tyre can cure the compound and make it essentially behave like a harder tyre. I used to do this quite a lot when I was racing myself. The tyres that the series used were really, really soft, and so they went off quickly. On a push lap, they actually wouldn't even last the whole lap at peak grip. But with the heat cycle through them, you could get a little bit more life from them. The Mercedes and Aston actually seem to be doing this to help a little bit. You should check out this video about how Perez and Hamilton seem to look after their tyres so well and how they are doing it. Thanks very much for watching. Thanks to our sponsor, Brilliant, and I will catch you in the next one.